So you heard in the previous video how much bone broth helped me with the cramping in my calves. And after that, I ended up becoming a big fan of bone broth. And I asked ChatGPT, what else can I do with it? Can I use it in any other way in my diet? And it said that you can use it as a condiment or as a topping for your beef that you're eating. And I thought, wow, that sounds interesting. I'll give it a go. So I got half a packet of minced beef, broke it up with my hands into an air fryer liner and cooked it for 8 minutes. It comes out a little bit like noodles. Cooked that up and I put some bone broth powder over the top of it. And it sort of, the fat was sort of absorbed by the bone broth. And it turned into something that tasted a lot like cheese. And I've always loved the flavour of cheese, but my body doesn't like dairy at all. And so it was something that was great. I had something that finally tasted good on this carnivore diet, this lion diet, which normally doesn't taste of anything. So I really enjoyed that, and I've done it 3 days in a row. And on the third day of doing it, I ate that and then I become very, very thirsty. And I went and drank some soda water. And this is when I learned that soda water, sparkling water, these things aren't actually as safe as you think they are in certain circumstances. So I drank the soda water and instantly, as soon as I drank it, I got this really bad pain in my lower stomach, sort of just below my navel on the right side, really bad pain. It was unbearable. I had to stop work and go and lay down. This is 4 p.m. And I laid there and I was hoping it would just clear at some point, but it didn't. It just stayed really, really painful. So I got up and tried to move around a little bit, and I was sort of, I can't remember the correct term, but I was sort of hunched over, like where the pain, I couldn't really stand up straight. If I tried to stand up like this, the pain was really, really bad, and I had to sort of bend forward again to try to take the pressure off of whatever was, it was pressing on. So this went on from 4 p.m. and it was now 12 or 1 a.m. at night, and it hadn't even remotely improved. It was still exactly the same. It was as painful, and I was just in a state between trying to just find a comfortable position to get in. I was trying to lay down, I couldn't do it. I was trying to stand up, I couldn't do it. The only position I found that really worked was there was a certain ledge in my old house, and if I sort of held onto it while bent forward, I could sort of get in a position where it wasn't unbearably painful, but it was still very painful. So anyway, it got to the point where I thought, well, I need to find something to solve this. And I was Googling, what you can do to cure trapped wind. And it was talking about bicarbonate of soda. So I looked up, where is the nearest 24-hour shop? I'm going to go and buy it now. And I actually found out, even though I lived in a really remote town at the time, they'd opened a 24-hour shop that week in my town, which I thought was mental, the chances of that happening. So I drove over there, and it was very, very difficult to drive. I was having to pick my leg up, my right leg up with my arms, like pull it up, literally, to like come up off the accelerator and like move it over to the brake and stuff. It was dangerous, but it was the middle of the night. I lived in the middle of nowhere, and I saw one other car the whole time. So I was in a really bad way. I got the bicarbonate of soda, I come back, I drunk it, and it probably made it about 25% worse. I was now in absolute agony. That was the worst pain I've ever felt in my life. It was so painful. I've never felt anything like it before. And so I then just sort of stood there trying to move out of the pain for the whole rest of that night into the morning. And as soon as the doctor's surgery opened, I phoned him up and I said, I explained the situation. I said, I've eaten this bone broth powder without mixing it with water, and then I've drunk soda water. As soon as I drank the soda water, I've got this real bad pain coming. And I said, I'm not exaggerating. Believe me, this is the worst pain I've ever felt. I know it's just trapped wind, but I don't know what to do about it. Would I be able to see a doctor to try to, give me some advice or give me something to help with this? And they said, we're sorry, it's fully booked today. You'll have to book in for tomorrow. And I said, well, what do I do about it now though? Because I'm not exaggerating. I am in a really bad way here. What would you advise I do? And she said, well, if you're as bad as you say you are, phone 999. And I said, okay. So I phoned 999. No, before that, I didn't actually. I phoned my mum and I said to her, Mum, I've had no sleep. I'm in a lot of pain. I feel like I might be making a wrong decision here. They're telling me to phone 999. I explained the situation. She said, phone them. She said, worst that can happen is you get checked out and you're okay. So I said, all right. So I phoned them up and I explained it to them. And I said what had happened. I told them the story, I drank this has happened. I'm now in such a bad way. I can't stand up straight. I don't really know what's wrong with me, but it seems to be really bad trapped wind. But I've had trapped wind before, and it can be painful. Don't get me wrong. Like it can be really painful trapped wind. But this was like nothing I've ever experienced. And so I told him about it. He said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how painful is it? And I said, 9, but in reality it was 10, but I didn't feel comfortable saying 10, so I said 9. He said to me, right, from everything you've described, that sounds like appendicitis. He said, you need to get to Macclesfield Hospital within the hour. He said, because your appendix is likely to explode. And I said, wow. I said, are you sure though? Because you understand what I said about the drinking the soda water, that this, you know. And he said, I understand that. He said, but the symptoms are there. Sometimes these coincidences just happen. And I thought instantly, well, there's no coincidence. It happened straight after I drank it. I know that this had a factor in it, played a significant factor in it. But anyway, he said to do that. Now I said, okay, how do I get there? Because I can't drive like this. Like I drove in the night, it really wasn't safe. And I'm worse now than I was when I was driving. So what am I supposed to do? Macclesfield's quite built up. It's not, I don't think it's a city, I don't know, but it's a bit like a city sort of roads. And there's no way that I weren't going to be able to use the brake and be safe at all. You know, trying to pull my leg up and that. So anyway, I said, how am I supposed to get, he said, if you can't drive, he said, you'll have to get a taxi. I said, okay, it's fine. Phoned up 3 taxi companies, 2 of them didn't answer. The other one, who was a bloke I knew that was all right, he was in Manchester doing an airport run, so he couldn't come and get me. So I phoned him back, I said, I can't, none of the taxis are there. Like, there's no one could come and get me. What should I do? Because now I'm panicking, because he said that my appendix is about to explode. And he said, you know, do you not have anyone that you can get to take you there? I said, I don't know anyone. Like, I moved into this place. It's a little cul-de-sac in the middle of nowhere. You know, I only know the woman over the road and she's not in, but I don't really know anyone else around here. And he said, well, you're going to have to find some way, because we'd normally send an ambulance, but we can't get one there for the next 4 hours. He said, so if you can wait for 4 hours, then we can do that. He said, otherwise, you know, you're going to have to find your own way there. I said, well, you're saying I can't wait for 4 hours though, right? He said, yeah. He said, it's an awkward situation that we're in. He said, but we aren't, like, we don't have that available. Like, we literally can't get someone there. I was like, okay. So I phoned her and she weren't at home. She was out. And I phoned her and I said, look, I'm really sorry to burden you with this, but would you mind taking me over to Macclesfield Hospital? Because, you know, they're saying my appendix is about to explode. I need to get there within the hour. And so she's dropped everything and she's got her friend to drive us there. And got me over there anyway. I felt really out of order putting that on her because I ruined her plans and everything. But got me over to the hospital. I went in, I sat down. I sat there for 10 minutes and they called me in to see the nurse. And the nurse said to me, have you taken any paracetamol? And I said, no. And she said, why not? And now at this time, because of her tone and everything, I felt like I was getting in trouble, like I had done something wrong. Yeah. And she said, why not? And I said, I didn't have any, which was true. I didn't have any, but even if I did, I wouldn't have took it, because paracetamol has never done anything with any issue I've ever had. Whenever I've tried paracetamol, it's never done anything. So that's the real reason why I wouldn't have done, even if I had it. I said I didn't have any. And she said, well, why didn't you go over the shop and get some? And again, for the same reason, because I was feeling like I was guilty, like I was having to defend myself at this point. I said, well, because I can't drive, because of the pain I'm in. It ain't safe to drive. She said, well, how did you get here? I said, a neighbour took me. And she said, why didn't you get them to take you over to the shop? I said, well, because they told me to come to hospital. They didn't tell me to go to the shop. And she said, well, if you did go over the shop, you wouldn't have had to come here, because you could have just took a paracetamol, here you go, and then give them to me, and then put this thermometer in my ear. And it all happened so quick. And like I say, it felt like I was being attacked, but I was in probably the most vulnerable state I've ever been in. Like I say, I don't think I've ever been in that much pain before in my life, ever. And put the thermometer in my ear, and then she went, oh, all right, go back in the waiting room. So I went back in the waiting room, sat there feeling like I was, a complete burden. And I was left to wait there for hours. Now, I know that in total I was there for 6 hours, but I don't remember the exact timeline of events. But I sat there, and then they moved me into another waiting room, and then I waited there, and then they moved me into another waiting room, and I waited there. And then I saw what I assumed was a doctor, and he said to me, you've got a fever. You have a very high fever right now. He said, and he was asking questions, have you used the toilet? And I said, no, like I've not urinated or had a bowel movement since this started, which was 4 p.m. the previous day. It was now somewhere around there, if not later. It might have even, I don't know what the time was at this point, but it was late evening or late afternoon. And maybe it was about 4 or 5, I don't know, don't matter anyway. But it had been a long time since I'd urinated or anything. And he said, okay. And he said, do you mind laying down on this bed? I laid down on it, he was pushing around. He said, yeah, lower right abdominal. He said, that is classic appendicitis. And I said, okay. I said, this is what they told me on the phone. I said, but do you realise, like what I was saying with the soda water, that it wasn't like I drunk it and then an hour later this pain started. It was literally instant. As soon as I drank it, the pain started. And he said, yeah, it's just a coincidence. That's what happens. He said, things like that happen sometimes. He said, but that's appendicitis. But don't worry, because your appendix doesn't do anything in your body. It's a useless organ. And when he said that, instantly, what came to mind, and it's not that I believe I know better than everybody, although I often do, but it was that because I've gone through all this health stuff for so long, I've read so much conflicting information. I've heard so many different people who claim to be experts on topics say one thing and then another person say the opposite, and they both conflict each other, but they both claim to be experts on this thing. And you know that a lot of this it's just human interpretation. That man telling me that this appendix has no use in the body, to me, that doesn't make it true. That just means that that person doesn't know what it does. And I don't know, because I've not really looked into it that deep since, but I would be very surprised if there is an organ that the creator put into the human body that does literally nothing. I'd be very surprised if in the future, when we actually have a proper understanding of the human body, that we find out that that's the case. And to give you some context of why my opinion is the way it is, you've got to bear in mind that I'm someone who has been constantly let down by the medical system my entire life. Every time I've gone with this issue, or maybe I'll make another video about that, but every time I've gone with this issue or issues that are caused because of this issue, I've been told stuff that has been totally wrong. And at this point, I realized it was all totally wrong, because the advice and the diagnosis that I was given with all of it was clearly not true, because when I went onto the diet that meant eating nothing but beef, it all went away and they told me it couldn't go away. So anyway, I lost my train of thought a little here. 1 second. What was I talking about? So he said it was appendicitis. Oh yeah. So he said it has no, and he said, but don't worry, it has no use in the body. So I knew it come from drinking the soda water, because it was so instant. That's not a coincidence. He's telling me it's not, and he's telling me that this organ has no use in the body. I didn't believe that, but I was in agony, and I was in a strange area that I've rarely been to, where I know no one, I'm on my own, and they're telling me I've got to have this operation because my appendix is about to explode and I can die if that happens. So I was understandably quite worried at this point, quite scared. So he sent me back to the waiting room, and he said, we're going to talk to the surgeon. He said, we're going to get this done as soon as possible. So I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, fucking hell. So I phoned up my mum, and I've said to her, they're saying it's appendicitis, I've got to have it removed. And she said, oh, okay. And she weren't there because I moved very far away. That's why no one come and visit me or anything. I moved far away from my family, like 4.5 hours away. So she was worried, which I think sort of made it a bit worse. So anyway, waited there for ages. I'm sitting in this waiting room. There's about 50 people in there. Opposite me, there's a guy who's got a really bad chesty cough or phlegm. And I remember this time he coughed. I almost saw it in slow motion. He coughed and phlegm come out of his throat, out of his mouth. And it landed like about this far away from my shoe. And I saw that and I thought, I don't want to be in here. This is horrible. Like, this is the worst waiting room. They've got a guy sitting 3 away from me. Yeah, 3 away from me in a wheelchair at the end of the aisle bit that I was in, with a bucket just throwing up constantly. Like, I don't know how he had this much liquid in his body to be throwing up, but he was throwing up for hours, just constantly throwing up. So I had this guy coughing phlegm over me, this person here being sick next to me. It was one of the nastiest environments, and it was absolutely packed. It was just heaving, but you were lucky to get a seat. And at this point I could sit down because things had started to improve a little bit. The pain was going. So anyway, they got me in there to talk to the surgeon, and he said to me, he was only a young kid. He looked like he was about 21, 22. Wasn't like someone you would think had been doing this for a long time. He looked like someone relatively new. So I had to explain the whole story again. Bone broth, powder, eating it, soda water, instantly got the pain. He said to me, yeah, I can see why you'd think that, but that is a coincidence. From everything that we've seen, it sounds like you've got appendicitis. He said, but we're going to do a blood test. He said, we'll get the results back. We're going to do that shortly. He said, but we'll probably be removing your appendix anyway as a precautionary measure. And I said, well, that doesn't sound good. I said, I would like it to be removed only if it needs to be removed. And he said, well, it doesn't matter because the appendix doesn't do anything. It's not a problem to remove it. And I said, you might say that, but I still don't want it removed unless I absolutely have to have it removed. And he said, well, it's up to you how you do it, but we would strongly advise that you do have it removed. I said, well, won't we see whether I have it on the blood test? And he said, yeah, we will. I said, okay. So sent me back to the waiting room, and I was sitting there, and I phoned my mum up. I said, yeah, they said they're doing it. And my dad come on the phone, and he was like, it's probably for the best, mate. He said, you know, to be safe. I said, I don't think it's that, though. I don't think that's what, I don't think I've got appendicitis. It started as soon as I drank that soda water. I know it's coming from that. And then, you know, they're saying to me, well, you know, they're the experts. You got to leave it in their hands, sort of thing, which is fair enough. And I hesitate to share this story because of the outcome of it. And I feel it's a little irresponsible to be suggesting others question the people that we put in charge of our health. But I'm going to share what honestly happened to me. So that's the best thing that I think I can do. And you make up your own mind what you want to do with things, as I would, because I wouldn't always go about things in this way. I just knew, and I had the intuition, and I knew what was right. So anyway, I waited there for absolutely ages. It was hours that I sat there waiting, and they didn't do the blood test. And then they called me in again to have another conversation about it. And it was just the same thing again, really. Just the same conversation again. Oh, you know, we'll remove the appendix. Just talking about it again. I sat back outside again, waiting. I didn't understand what the point of bringing me in that second time was. But at that time, when I got up and I walked over, I felt like it hadn't completely gone. You know, using their pain scale of out of 10, it was probably at about a 6 now. And it had really gone quite a lot. So I said to him, I found him that I went into the little bit like behind the room, because it was really weird setup in that hospital. I pushed the door up and just walked straight into that bit where they had the beds for, like, I don't know if it was a recovery room or whatever, but they used it as like a consultation room for me. But I pushed it open and I went and found him, and I said to him, the pain is going a lot. I said, it's really reducing. Sorry, I forgot a key point here. When I walked out of there on that second time of seeing him, I actually needed the toilet. And I went to the toilet and I was able to urinate. And I was like, whoa, okay, that's different, because I tried to do that before and I couldn't. So I'm like, something's changing here. The pain's going, I've been able to urinate. So anyway, this is when I went back and I pushed that door open. I just walked straight through. And I found him and I shared that with him. And he said, okay, he said, the thing is, he said, that will be from the paracetamol. And I said, what do you mean? He said, where the pain has gone, he said, paracetamol is a very effective painkiller. I said, it ain't that good. I've took pain, like paracetamol before, it don't do anything. I said, the pain I was in there, I've been in situations where I've been nowhere near as bad as that. Took paracetamol, it's done nothing. Like, there's no way paracetamol has done that. Plus, I was unable to urinate. I was pushing really hard. I could not do anything. I've just been able to. And it took a bit of effort, but I was still able to. And he said, paracetamol is a powerful thing. And I said, I don't think that's right. And he said, look, we strongly advise that, he said, just, we'll do the blood test. He said, but it's going to be, you know, the operation is very likely. So I went and sat down, and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking everything about this is wrong, right? At this point, I've been waiting for 6 hours. They told me, get to the hospital within an hour, it's going to explode, all this stuff. At this point, I've been waiting for 6 hours, and I've still not had a blood test. And so I walked outside to clear my head. I thought, they're not calling me, I'm just sitting here anyway. They're not calling anyone, in fact. Like, everyone who was here when I first come in this bit of this particular waiting room a couple of hours ago is still here. No one's going in. Like, there's no point me waiting here in case I miss my spot. So I walked outside to get some air and process it. I find if you pace around a bit when you're outside, it helps you to make better decisions for some reason. And I thought to myself, I'm going home. These people don't know what they're talking about. I've told them from the start, this is trap wind. They've told me it's appendicitis. I've told them that it started as soon as I've drunk the soda water. They've told me we're going to remove that as a precaution. Then they've told me that this appendix doesn't have any function in the body. None of this is giving me any confidence in them. I was treated incredibly rude by the first nurse, who basically insinuated that I was a time waster as soon as I come through, made me feel like a burden. I don't trust these people, and I think they're wrong. So I phoned up my mum and I said to her, Mum, I think I'm going to go home. I don't think I'm going to go through with this. I've just used the toilet. I was able to urinate. I wasn't able to do that before. The pain's not as bad. I can stand up straight now. I said, it hurts, don't get me wrong, but I can stand up. Like, it's improving on its own. I don't think I need to have my appendix taken out. And she said, Dan, stay there. Like, they're the experts. You've got to trust them. And she's just worried because at the end of the day, she knows her youngest son is in a strange place in a hospital on his own in the middle of the night in a really bad way when they've told him his appendix is about to explode. So she's worried. And the same thing with my dad. And he said the same thing. Dan, stay there. You know, let them do it. Play. This is, you know, the safe thing. They know what they're doing. And as I say, both of them were saying that from a place of care. I just want to make that clear that I knew where they were coming from. But because I knew where they were coming from, I also knew that they were wrong. And so I walked back in, and this was the crazy thing about that hospital. They had the bit where, there was that bit I went in to the right, but there was a bit at the back, which is where all the, like, I guess the surgeons or whatever they were at the back bit, but it had a door that was locked. It had like a lock thing, like you couldn't just go through it. And I walked up to it, and as I walked up, one of the nurses or whatever went through. And so I just held the door open and just walked straight in. And I found someone there, and I said, who do I need to talk to about? Because there was no one in the waiting room. There was no nurses or anything. That's why I forced my way in. And I said, who do I need to talk to about discharging myself here? And they all looked like they panicked when they saw me, because they was all just standing around having a conversation. There was about 4 of them standing around this, there was like this desk here, and there was one sitting here and 3 of them here, and they were just having a casual conversation. It was, I can't say for sure it wasn't about work, but it didn't look like it was about work, because their energy when I walked in was like I caught them, like they were guilty. You know, the way they looked up and then all scattered off. Scattered off? I don't know how you say that. Whatever. They all, you know, quickly left. And I said, who, to the one sitting there, who do I need to talk to about discharging myself? She said, you know, this person here. I said, but he's busy at the moment. Go and wait in the waiting room and he'll come and find you. So I went and stood out in the waiting room, but I didn't go and sit down because there wasn't anywhere to sit at this point anyway, but I didn't want to be near the guy throwing up and the guy coughing over me, all them people with all this like sickness. I didn't want to get in the middle of all that again. So I stood in the walkway, but it was quite a wide room, wide waiting room. And I stood like in the middle of it, right? And I just stood there waiting, and a lot of people, and I was looking at that door because I just wanted to get out. At this point, I was considering, well, should I just go? Like, what am I waiting here for? I stood there for like 5 minutes waiting for this guy to come out. And I thought, should I just leave? I thought, I don't know how it works. And, you know, I want to do the right thing and you know, confront them on it. But don't get me wrong, I was still scared because in the back of my mind, everyone's telling me your appendix is going to explode. So I was certain, like I felt like it was the right thing to do, but it was still like it was a worrying moment, you know, where there was a bit of self-doubt, but at the same time, I knew deep down that it was the right thing to do. So anyway, they're just waiting, just staring at the door. And I noticed that I caught the attention of a few people who were sitting at the in the waiting room, because they're all bored out of their mind. Like, yeah, a lot of them were genuinely very ill, but they've just been left to just sit and rot in this waiting room. So they're bored. Why is this guy just standing in the middle of this thing? So anyway, I waited there, and then this geezer come out, and he said to me, Daniel, and I said, yes. He said, what's going on? And I said, nothing. I've just been sitting here for 6 hours. Nothing's gone on. And he said, we're very busy. I'm sorry about that. And I said, I know. I said, but I've told the guy that I'm feeling better now. I want to go home. He said, for everything that has been written down here, he said, it's very, very likely that your appendix is going to explode if you leave here. And I said, well, if you really thought that, you wouldn't have left me sitting in the waiting room for 6 hours without even giving me a blood test, would you? And at this point, I had the whole waiting room looking at me. Now, I wanted to get into public speaking. Like, it was something I wanted to learn how to do for business reasons. But I never expected that this was going to be my first experience of it, when I was at my most vulnerable, when I hadn't slept, when I was exhausted and in front of a bunch of sick people who were bored out of their mind. And so I was like the only bit of entertainment that they had, you know, the guy sort of confronting them. And he said to me, what was it? There was another thing that happened after that. Oh yeah, this was the crazy thing. Bearing in mind we're in front of everyone right now, yeah? He said to me, I said to him, I was able to, I said, you know, I can stand up now, as you can see, whereas I was like bent forward, I couldn't straighten out my spine. I can now. It hurts a bit, but it's a lot better. So my body is clearly dealing with it on its own. I said, also, I was able to go to the toilet. And I said it sort of vaguely like that because I've got an audience of people. And like I say, I didn't want my first experience in public speaking to be talking about bowel movements. And he said to me, what did you do? And I said, I was able to urinate. And he said, did you have a bowel movement? And I said, no. And he said, well, this is the issue. I said, well, it's not surprising. I haven't eaten anything, you know, for over 24 hours. I said, that's not really that shocking. And anyway, so went back and forth for a while. He said, if you're absolutely sure, I can't stop you. And so he gave me a bit of paper. I signed it and walked out. And as I walked out, this bloke followed me out. And I got outside and he said to me, good on you, mate. He says, it's about time someone says something. The way they treat us in there is disgusting. And I used it as a moment to vent my frustration a little bit. I was like, I said to him, like, that's the most pain I've ever been in my life. I said, they told me to rush up here. My appendix is going to explode. They've left me sitting here for 6 hours. I was using it to vent, right? I went on for a little bit and he went, yeah, it's bang out of order that. Here, look at this. And he pulled his phone out and there was a picture of this young blonde woman on there. And I went, yeah. And he started flicking through pictures and it was her in her underwear, like half naked. And he went, that's my ex-missus. And I went, right. And he just kept flicking through these pictures. And I went, yeah. Like thinking he's going to say she works at the hospital, like she has something to do with it, like she had an experience like, or something like that. And he just kept flicking through them. He's like, look, I'm just flicking through these pictures. And I stood there for about a minute and I was obviously in an emotional state from what had just happened. And I was trying to process, like, how is he going to link this into the conversation? And after about a minute, I thought, well, this ain't going anywhere. Like, I don't get why you've done this. So I went to him, anyway, look, I got to phone a taxi anyway, mate. And he was like, all right, yeah, no worries. And he put his phone back in his pocket and walked back in the hospital. And I assume just went and sat back down again, waiting to get seen. Really weird that. And that's one of them things that like puzzles me. Like when it's late at night and I'm reflecting on things that have happened to me, that's one of them things I think, like, what the hell was that about? Like, did he want sympathy? Was he looking for like some sort of validation? Like, why follow me out and do weird, really weird. But anyway, so that was the other thing he said, actually. I just remembered when he was flicking through, he went to me, she's fit, isn't she? And I was like, yeah. And like, that was why at that point I started to think, like, what is going on here, you know? And if you're wondering, she was, but I didn't see what relevance it had. So anyway, I got a taxi home and then I was able to sleep that night for about 3 hours because the pain had gone down that much that I actually was able to sleep. And I got up the next day, still had trouble, you know, moving about and stuff. I did have to drive over to the shop. And I might tell this story another day if anyone's interested as well, about when because I temporarily come off of the Lion diet for a while because of that. And that brought some problems as well. But I went over the shop, it was hard to drive. It was still very painful. Lifting that leg up was still hurting a lot, but it was a lot easier to drive than it was that night, a couple of nights prior. And then for the next week, I was just burping, but not loud. It wasn't like a Homer Simpson sort of thing. It was like really low, but long. It would go on for ages, like 3 seconds or something, for like a week after. And then it cured. It went away. And obviously I never had bone broth as a powder on top of the mince again. And I actually stayed away from bone broth for months after that. It scared me off it. Now I'm back on it and obviously I use it more responsibly now. But yeah, true story, something that happened and just thought I would share it. And there's a couple of things there. Obviously the main takeaway is don't put bone broth powder on top of your minced beef and then drink soda water because you might get your appendix randomly removed from you. But also just sharing the story here, like maybe you've been in a situation like that in the past, and because you know what it's like when you're in a situation like that and you're around the people who are considered the authority, the expert on it, and you're just the dumb guy there who's saying, please help me, I'm in a bad way. But you know they're going down the wrong route and you're surrounded by people who are all complicit and wouldn't want to say anything, wouldn't speak up in a situation like that when we're all being treated very, very poorly. And you know, I don't know, maybe this could be something that gives you the strength to speak up like I did when you know what's right. Now, I'm not saying if you've got someone telling you to have something done medically to ignore them, because I don't know your situation and only you know that, but it's just maybe to give you food for thought that at least my experiences in life has been that these people have been constantly wrong. And that worries me, because if anything serious ever happened that I actually did need their help with, I would really have to consider whether or not to take their advice, which is a position that I don't want to be in, but it's one that I'm in. Thanks for listening.